Hi, friends. Welcome back. Hi, my name is Cyn Lagos. I am so happy to have you here. Hopefully you've seen my past streams. I'm trying to make this a beautiful, consistent hangout for both of us. So my name again is Cyn Lagos. I am a graphic designer, a photographer, aspiring filmmaker, and most of all, a mentor for aspiring artists such as yourselves. I love sharing my workflow, and today I'm going to be diving into the editing zone. I love getting into these zones of editing countless numbers of photographs I take on any given day. And this time, the location is New York City subway. Wow. Okay. Very specific. So I have these amazing, interesting experiences where I just choose to go out, take my camera on a street adventure. I've been doing it for such a long time. I want to say I have a start date, but I don't remember. I'll dig into that. But I've been doing it for a very long time, and I've always loved the discovery element of it. It's always been kind of one of those things where I get to explore and just never really know what I'm going to find when you like turn the corner, or what kind of folks are out and about living their lives, you know? So at times I find gems, at times everything's a little bit chaotic and it just ends up in my picture, and it's still nevertheless I think a valuable image. So I'm gonna try to peruse through some of those photos today and explore how I edit them on Adobe Lightroom. So if you're in the chat, say hello, and if you're in the comments, also say hello. I'll see you out there, and let's jump into Adobe Photoshop. All right, my friends. Oh, did I say Adobe Photoshop? Adobe Lightroom. Just kidding. All right. So, all right, my friends, we're in Adobe Lightroom. And as you can see, we're not just in Adobe Lightroom, we're also in New York City. Actually, I think the stop was, in fact, somewhere outside of Manhattan. So, a little bit all over New York. So I love these moments where passerbyers are just kind of in their zone. And whether we like it or not, as photographers, I often find myself folks who are on their phones. And whether we like it or not, this is a testament of today. So I don't shy away from photographing that moment as well. I think one day those phones may not be there anymore, and maybe something else is in its place, or nothing at all. Who knows what the future has in store? But nevertheless, this is a moment right now, so I photograph it. I think that's the approach I like to take whenever I'm doing street photography. you are first and foremost documenting, and secondly, curating. I find curating to be a very, very stimulating part of the street photography aspect. So in this case, I have this image here. I also found this moment where this fellow was just looking down and maybe in his own moment and their own thoughts. And I love the way the light was reflecting on them so perfectly, right? And you can see a little bit of hints of silhouettes kind of there on the background. And that looks really neat too, because you just start to see that he's not alone here, even though he is our main subject, he's not necessarily on his own. Okay, so let's see here. Nice. All right. Checking in that we're doing well on the back end, behind the scenes. Okay, so hi everyone who's here. I'm gonna start jumping into editing some of these images. I think I'm gonna start with the first image that we just reviewed. I really like this image. It has plenty going on. There's a lot of texture. So something I like to do is categorize or I don't know, almost think of an image as layers. So if the image itself could be divided into independent categories, what would it be? And for me, one of the categories that makes up an image is how minimal or how busy it is. In this case, it's busy with a lot of subjects, but also a lot of texture. You can just see there's elements all over this image that incorporate texture of some kind. Even the trees up here have a degree of texture. So I'm gonna start editing this, making sure to highlight some of these elements that might already inform what kind of decisions I might make in my editing process. If I do enjoy the texture, I might want to enhance it, not shy away from it, things of that nature. And then there's also the aspect that I was using a filter that sort of diffuses a lot of the edges of this image. And I like that because it makes it feel very dream-like. So right away, I think I'm gonna jump into cropping, because cropping is a tool that I feel like should be maybe rebranded to be called composition, because with cropping you can actually manage to develop a brand new composition that maybe you didn't consider in that moment, right? Like this can feel like an entire other scene. And I find that to be very helpful as I consider the different ways I can crop out elements that are distracting, or maybe in that same breath, keep in elements that are helpful, right? So there's so many variations of compositions that we can experiment with. We don't have to stick to one. We can do a 1-to-1 ratio and do this, let me just check this out. Okay, 1-to-1 ratio and do this sort of to the side focus. We have now this subject matter, this person, individual here in the center, and our who used to be our first subject matter is now on the side, right? So it's really particular how we choose to help the eye travel through the image. So we have that cropping. Let's see if we can attempt other croppings here. Let's try maybe something like 5x4. I'll hit Shift X to make that a vertical 5x4. And maybe this building here in the back is actually part of the scene. What do you guys think? Which one is your favorite layout? I love this one. This one really makes it feel like we're in a movie, a film of sorts. Don't know how I can post this online, and yet I love it, right? Sometimes the function isn't there, but if it feels like a moment, that's sometimes worth honoring far more than whether it would work online. I mean, it should be the other way around, right? Like social media should befit our artistic choices, and we all succeed. Okay, so let's see how this could look once I start adapting different light choices and color choices. So in this case, I think I'm gonna try to do a bit of color editing. I see here there's a lot of overexposure. Now, on a technical term, overexposure is not good, but on a stylistic viewpoint, you might think, well, actually, those overexposures are often utilized by directors in films. Underexposures are actually really loved for the contrast, the chiaroscuro element of them. In this case, this overexposure is a little diffuse thanks to my filter, so I kind of rather like it, but I can always revisit it with the curve tool and actually using this target adjustment tool to manage my light choices, right? I can go right over a certain selection and it'll pick that highlight and any highlights around the image. It's a bit of a global edit, not entirely, but just it does affect the entirety of the image, and you can see why if we were to go really drastic there. And down here, this particular tool, we can drag it around. It's modular. So we can actually look at the different decisions that we're making. We can use that target adjustment tool for the curves, so dictating lights, midtones, and shadows, or we can use it for color choices. So that target adjustment tool is one of my favorite things to always come back to because it's just so specific. And so I might want to go in here into the shadows and actually make them a little bit darker. Pure black can tend to have almost zero information. So we're not gonna manage that too much. But I might want to start pulling the midtones a little bit and see what that would look like. Cool. Now let's go into the target adjustment tool, but for color in this case. So we can click that color there and it gives us three options: hue, saturation, and luminance. Now luminance still deals with highlights and midtones and shadows, all of that, but in respect to color. So for example, this building back here, we can dictate the luminosity of it, but the luminosity of the color itself. And I can do the same thing here. So that could be another way to bring back some information. For example, here we can see a little bit more of the bricks, right? You can see the bricks there a little bit better. And you can see the colors a little bit more. So there are several ways to consider: how can I bring back contrast? How can I bring back information into my image? So I might lower this just a little bit. It is affecting his skin here, so I want to be a little bit cautious about how much I pull those levers. This luminosity is starting to bring some hue back, some blue up here. That's pretty cool. And now if I go into hue, I can start moving some of the color palettes to a different color palette, right? So that's what hue does. It's just changing that particular color of your choosing to a different hue within that spectrum. I think I like it a little bit on the warmer side. And same with the blue. I can do a bit of a purple. I can do a little bit of teal. Everybody loves that kind of nice blue. And I think when it comes to saturation, I'll desaturate that. I don't really want too much attention up there. But interestingly enough, I really like how the blue looks on these windows. I don't like how it looks up here, but I do like how it looks on the windows. So how do I choose, right? Do I have to choose? I can actually select particular areas of my image that I want to modify. So I think in this case, I might actually resort to using a masking tool. So in our masking area, we're going to find these AI-driven tools that automatically select certain parts of your image. And that's really helpful because we can create a modification to a particular section instead of the entire thing. It's all about precision. So for example, if I actually just want these windows to be selected, I can go in here and choose a brush, an object, a linear gradient, whichever one we find could be a best fit. So for example, let's say we select an object. We might want to reduce this. Detecting the object. Brush again. Let's brush again. And you can see I'm not doing too precise of a selection. I am just choosing that area, and it made those selection right across the edges so seamlessly. It's amazing. I love that we don't have to spend time creating these particular changes. We can actually have a little bit more time in the creative process of it, right? So I now have that selection, and that's my mask up here. So now that I've made that selection, I can modify those sections however I choose to. I can actually increase the exposure, decrease it, kind of black them out completely. That's cool. Actually, I might want to add more to this because I just noticed there's more windows. Nobody told me. All right, let's see if we can continue adding to this mask. So I'm going to add selecting a subject, an object. So again, let's brush this area and let's brush this one too. All right, that makes more sense now. We're selecting all of the windows, and now we can modify it, and we can choose to black them out completely. We can choose to create a bit more highlight in them, a little bit more light, as if light actually was there to begin with. Something like that. And I can actually modify the color via the color temperatures and the tint. Maybe we want to change the hue a little bit. I feel like that looks really good. And we didn't have to modify the sky. So that's kind of interesting because now this gives you a whole nother level of power for you to make edits to particular sections. So I think that's the way I'm going to approach it from here. And now that I have this, I might want to create a new mask. And in this case, I'm going to select a subject. And almost immediately, it gives me a detection. It detected that there was a subject right here in the foreground. So it asked me, did you get the results I expected? In this case, yes. And I'm gonna go in here and see this mask and modify a little bit of the exposure on it. Some of that contrast. Now we created more visibility on the wrinkles of his jacket, and I feel like it already looks a lot better. Now let's make a stylistic choice and go all the way down to, oh, we're still in masks. Let's step out of masks, go to the edit tool, and go all the way down to color grading. I love using the color grading tools. So I'm gonna go into the shadows, because you can see there's some shadows all over this image, all over it. So I thought, why not give them a little oomph and create a shadow that's a little bit more styled. So we can create a shadow that's a little bit on the warmer tone to give that sweet homage to film, or do something like this where it's a bit on the greener side, and again, different variation of film. And once I start playing with this, I recognize that maybe I like more than one variation. So this is where versions comes in. I love jumping into versions and creating different variations. Blue film. And let's see, let's go back to that really sweet kind of purple film. Purple film. And I'll make one more, that kind of orangey sort of sepia look, and call it sepia film. Ooh, sepi, like French or something like that. Okay, so you can see I have all of those variations saved here in case I want to look back and say, maybe later, come back into my workflow and have a fresh set of eyes and determine which is the one that I like the most. And so I have a similar image here that looks like this, right? So I might want to go straight into it and copy and paste the filter, or I can experiment with this in its own ways to see what kind of results I come up with, right? It's really worth experimenting with. So I'm going to pick the color mixer again and grab that target adjustment tool and maybe desaturate the image and saturate it on sort of the yellow side, because I love that her hair is red. So it's kind of cool to create this emphasis on that orange hue as opposed to the blue. So we're desaturating any other color in there, the color on the sign and things that had that color bouncing off of them. So that's before, after, cool. I'm liking that so far. I might want to go then into my point curve and start to modify some of the channels. I'm going to raise my red channel value, lower my blue. I'm going to raise my green value, lower my purple, raise my blue value, and lower my yellow. It's before, and this is after. And now in this one, you notice we did not begin with the composition tool, the crop tool. but it's never too late. We're gonna go in here and we can find different grid systems by hitting the letter O, and you can find these variations of grids that can help inform your decisions as you crop the image. Now, you might think, well, maybe I should make everything quite perfect like this. And I think that looks fairly awesome. I might want to lower some of the highlights, and I'll do this in a little bit. First, well, I'll do it now. Let's lower those highlights just a little bit. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. Now let's create a variation and call it red 1. And then I'm gonna do another cropping approach. So I might want to do something where everything's a little bit tilted and give it a sense of incline. And it gives it a sense of speed too. There's something particularly interesting, right? In graphic design, we often adapt angular lines in order to give the sense of graphics moving, or visual designs moving forward. So if you were to have a design for a sport brand, they might want, or a running company, they might want something that is often angular to give that sensibility. So you can adapt those types of visual languages into your imagery too. Now, I might want to do something else here. I notice, wow, that looks so nice. I love the way the filter kind of diffuses those edges. It's just very, very beautiful, and I love seeing that. I'm gonna make this variation, call it incline. And I might want to make a bit of a light coming from that lamp. Let's see if we can make that happen. So let's go into the brush tool and let's see, decrease the size there. And just create a bit of a light here. The scene is not that dark for this light to really come through, but I was thinking maybe adding a color here. So let's see if we can colorize using the colorize tool. You can see that coming through. Let's see if this looks natural. Maybe something like that. I don't know that I like it. It's an interesting idea, but I think if my scene was very dark, I could possibly approach it and it makes sense of it. So should we make that scene darker? Let's see. Let's duplicate. Let's start. This is why versions are so cool, because I can start on my original and then begin to modify that as I have the ideation coming through, right? So I'm gonna go into my exposure and kind of lower this exposure quite a bit. And then when it comes to contrast, that's fine. I'm gonna jump into this little squiggly guy, which it lets you edit the parametric curve. It's a very precise decision on the midtones and the shadows and highlights that I really quite like the results of. So I'm gonna do that here. really bringing down all the colors so that this is before and this is after. I hope you also have your tea and your coffee by your side as we're working along this editing zone. If you're just joining us, we're editing in Adobe Lightroom, and we're editing these really precious scenes of subway moments in New York City. All right, so let's see how this would look. Now that we brought down a lot of the lights, I even love the way the sky looks there. So I might want to modify that sky. And I think I'm gonna modify the hue particularly. So I'm gonna bring this up so you can see what I'm talking about, right? Let's bring it over here. So let's modify that hue. Do a little bit of a teal there. And in the luminance, I'm gonna bring it just down just a little bit, not too much. I'll do that. Sweet, I think that looks cool. And I think I'm gonna still use that masking I'm gonna use the masking to modify those renders, those windows, so that we can create something pretty neat and independently, right, of the sky, as we did before. I like the way that looks. I do want the saturation to be a lot less. I think I like it about there, and we can always revisit it. And then I'm gonna go into this little section here. Create a new mask, select subject, and it says there's no subject selected, but there is a subject. So let's help AI find our subject. So we're gonna go into the object, and we're gonna try to brush this object. And now it's found our subject. Yay. Okay. So actually it's missing a little bit of the shoe. That's okay. I don't think that's, I'm more concerned with her hair in this case. So let's see. All right, so I have my mask, and let's try to modify some of the elements here. I might bring up her temperature a little bit and also lower that tint. Create a little bit more sharpness so we can really focus on our subject. Do a little defringing. And when it comes to light, I might want to expose her just a little bit more. Expose that lighting, contour. There you go. I like that. I think that's looking pretty well. So now let's revisit that light. I'm a little nervous. Is it dark enough for there to be light? It's a good question. So let's see. Let's go into the masking tool. And now a part of me definitely is curious to do this in Photoshop, but I'm challenging myself to do this in Lightroom. So let's see if we can do that. We can create a linear gradient, which would do something like this, but it's a little bit too much, right? Kind of does it all over the place, but we can use that linear gradient in another fashion in a little bit. Let's see if we can try doing, I think the brush tool is our go-to. I wish there was a pen tool so we can create a brush. I mean, a pencil so we can, a pen tool so we can create a mask. We can draw a mask. Is there? Do I not know of this? I think it's just not there yet. So I'm just gonna draw a bit of like a triangle, and it would settle kind of there. And then we're going to modify that exposure, that luminosity, the highlights, and the shadows. So it gives it a little bit of light. I'm gonna hit Alt there to draw it a little bit more precise. Now, let's see. This is without it, this is with it. Let's erase this a little bit more. That's our mask. So without it, with it. I like it. It's a little bit of a touch. If my scene was even darker, it would definitely be more prominent. But it's kind of cool to have that choice just by having a selection in a mask. And as you know, I'm going to jump in here and crop. Let's definitely do a 9x16 to create a narrow crop on this one. Now in this case, this is serving a lot of, yes, I'm ready for that 9x16 social media ratio, and I look good in it. You know, it's not sacrificial. This actually looks perfect on it. And I'm gonna actually use the rule of thirds to align where she's going to fall, which is in that cross point. Solid, beautiful. All right, so now that there is yet another variation that we got going on. So let's call this red 3 for now. And so we had this option. We started here. We had this option, then we did a bit of an incline, and then we had this option, which is absolutely completely different from all the other ones. I love it. I think that looks really, really good. And not to forget the 9x16 horizontal that we just created. All right, so shall we go into another scene? By the way, if you're just joining us, my name is Cyn Lagos. I love editing, getting into the editing zone in Adobe Lightroom, specifically to go over some of my recent street photography adventures, where I like to find or document scenes as they're happening in life. So these are some really remarkable scenes that I think are unique on their own just because they happened. And we are approaching their color editing, their composition, and anything else that can get a little bit more creative here on Adobe Lightroom. I love doing these editing zones. Hope you're enjoying them too. Let's continue on to another image in the subway of New York City. Okay, let's see. Should we begin to do a bit of underground subway photographs? Let's see. I was kind of on autopilot there. I always go for cropping first. It's really rare that I don't, but I can already tell I did a lot of premeditated cropping ahead of time during my composition in camera. And I know this because my previous photo looked a little like this. Sometimes I take this photo because I see the moment and I don't want it to escape me. And I don't know how long it will last, but I did love the scene a little bit for different reasons. Even though this person was here in the foreground, sometimes the foreground individual kind of plays a nice role as the sort of the depth of the scene, right? So if they're blurred enough. But in this case, I feel like they're kind of out of frame. They don't quite make the mark. So I still love this image and I would like to repurpose it, but I don't think horizontally it will make do. So, by the way, do you see that there's a little smiley face back here? So I'm going to instead sidetracks always. So I'm going to instead look at the value of this image. I love this continuity here of the two lights heading downwards, right? I don't get that here. I can barely see the source of the light, but I do get it on this one. So I might want to crop this individual out. In theory, I can use the power of AI and banish this person altogether. But we're approaching traditional techniques here. I can't believe I had to just say traditional techniques. Okay, so I'm going to use the cropping tool in order to get rid of things I do not want in my scene. And I do that by choosing a different cropping method. So instead of horizontal, I'm going to hit Shift X and create a vertical scene. Still wish he was a little bit more to the center, but let's see what this looks like. It's pretty peculiar. So I'm honoring the lights as a way to guide my composition a little more in this case, trying to center them as much as I can. And in a way, this empty space does feel like it plays a role, and that little happy smile gets a little bit of the stage time there. Yeah, not everything has to be centered, and I think this can function in that way. I do see a bit of distortion here on the line. The line is not straight, and that's not due to the scene, that's due to my lens. So I'm gonna go into optics and try to let Lightroom help me remove the lens warping. So enable lens correction. And you can see right away it already straightened it so quickly because it detected that I had a Canon 24-70 lens. And so I was able to modify those immediate changes, warping things that happen to that lens. And I can always push the lever a little bit and modify it to my own liking. So let's see here. Okay, that's looking good. I feel like that looks a lot better. I would like to, in fact, remove some elements, some random elements in this image to just clean it up just a little bit. Yeah, I especially like cleaning up things that don't matter, like dust specks and things like that. Yeah, can we all live in a cleaner world? Sure, we can make it happen in real life and in Lightroom. So let's start with Lightroom. So I'm just going to use the healing brush to go over some of those areas. And at the end of the day, somebody's scum ended up on the floor, but not on my picture. Great. I think that's so much better. Before, after. Just by making those modifications, it already looks drastically different, and we haven't done a whole lot yet. Beautiful. I love the lighting in this image. It's very special. So I might, in a different way, like to approach the versions via each of my workflow steps. So in this case, I'll call it cropping, correcting. Cropping, correcting. So whenever I choose to, I can always go back to the original. I can go into that cropping option. I can actually even modify this cropping even more. There's lots of room here to make modifications, and then I can follow the next step in my workflow, whether that's light correction, color correction, and in that particular order, and save the versions as I go along. I look at this image and I'm really, really excited to edit some of these highlights and some of these lights here in the background. So we're gonna use that masking technique. Nope, not the brush. Let's use, right away I selected my subject. Not the backpack though, but the subject. That's gonna come in handy. But actually, I want to select these objects here in the background. That didn't do that good of a job. Let's see there. Okay, that's okay. I can also create a masking based on luminance range. And in this case, I'm trying to examine the highlights in the background. So I can also select a luminance. And it'll select anything that has that luminance hue. Pretty cool, right? So now you can see the mask that we've created. And I can actually go in here and create different choices for this scene. So I can make those highlights extremely blue, extremely yellow, add a little bit of a hue to them independently. And I think that's pretty cool to have those kinds of controls over your image. You can choose how much it's covering, the mask is covering, which is neat. All right. I think I'm going to move on from that section. And there's so much to do in this image that I'm almost at a loss of where to begin. Okay, so I definitely want to use my grading tool and go into the midtones. Go into midtown. Let's go to midtown and start to modify a little bit of those hues into sort of a warmer tone. And then in the shadows, I want to add a bluer tone and try to balance those colors. Nice. I feel like that is starting to look a little bit different. And then I'm going to go into the yellow particularly and see how it can affect that hue to look a little bit more vibrant. I think I want the blue to be even bluer than that. Let's see. It's a little bit more on the purple hue there. Yeah, I like it there more. So then in my highlights, I might want to add a little bit of green. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we have an option here. We added blue to our shadows, orange to our midtones, green to our highlights. Okay, that's an option here. So option 1. Now let's do the opposite. Let's do the warm color to our shadows. Let's do the cold, cool color to our midtones. Okay. And then let's do an opposite color, maybe that fuchsia, to our highlights. And that gives a whole different look. So let's add this look. I'm just gonna call it 2 for now. And you can see the differences. Right? That's pretty peculiar. Now I'm gonna go back to the first one and try a different color variation using the tone curve. So I'll bring down the midtones towards the green, bring up the shadows towards the red, and mimic that everywhere else. Actually, I don't even have to do it. I can just select them, copy, and I believe I can paste them. Did I dream that? I do remember I could do that. It's okay. Let's give it a go. Try to emulate that same curve on each section, so on each channel. And they're basically layering on top of each other, so they're going to affect each other. And that's the way we're approaching them. Okay. That's pretty cool. I feel like that creates a different look altogether. All right. So I'm going to approach this image, which is the horizontal variation of it. And for the last few minutes that I have with you, I'm going to try to edit this image fast and with all the tools that we just learned today: masking, target adjustment tool, the tonal ranges, and the point curve, and experiment. Even though it's a similar image, it doesn't mean it has to have the same result. This image can be edited by other folks and it'll have a completely different scene altogether. So I'm gonna go in here, and I think right away my cropping is so necessary. We also learn about objects, so I'm going to be using that. I'm going to enable the lens correction so that my line here is perfect. You saw that? It happened so quickly. It was pristine. Perfect. Right? I love everything here, like the horizontal lines all over. Just great. I promised we were going to use the masking tool here, and we're going to use it. We're going to use our linear brush and expand that highlight a little bit more. It's like we're turning on and off that light. I want to exaggerate it a little bit because secretly I wish I grabbed more of it. But that's okay. That's okay. Also, if we wanted to paint it, we totally could. We can paint it a different color. Let's do that. Okay. Now I'm gonna increase my red channel, decrease my blue, increase my highlights to the red channel, decrease my blues, decrease my shadows to the blues, decrease my shadows to the purples, increase my highlights to the green. Increase. I feel like that looks like a cool color. All right. I feel like that's interesting, right? I don't know. There's something really movie-like about it. Now I'm gonna get out of this step. Actually, I'm gonna go back into it and select my subject. Boom. AI magic. There it is. All right, so let's increase the temperature of this fella. I love all the texture. Everything just kind of blends together in a way. I can choose to completely desaturate them or saturate them a bunch. Let's see the light changes. All right, that is looking good. And now I think I'm gonna go into the global changes. Okay, I'm gonna go into the global changes and add some color to my shadows. I feel like a little bit of that purple, and in my highlights, back to that green to emulate that green at the top. And I gotta be careful here on my midtones because they definitely affect the sky. I mean the light at the top. I think that looks good. And then I'm just gonna select that yellow and see if I can change the hue a little bit. Maybe a little bit more luminance. That's the before, that's the after. It's kind of a particular scene, right? There's so much going on in it already that I feel like makes it perfect, that even just a little bit of color just gives it a little bit more of that effect. And I'm enjoying that. It's one of my favorite photos. I'm glad that it was, sometimes things fall so perfectly into place and it's so wonderful to see that. So I'm going to create that version here. Color 1. Oh, not color. Color. I type too fast sometimes on my keyboard. I think that looks really pretty. I wonder if I can create another variation. So I'm gonna treat the original to a different crop. So let's do a 4x5, 5x4. No, I think I want horizontal. What if this fella back here was part of the scene somehow? Should we keep the light? Should we take the light? That feels completely different. Completely different. And actually, I'm going to add that linear gradient here on the side and create a bit of a film leak effect. That looks cool. And so the foreground is a little bit warmer, the background's a little bit darker. And that in itself is already a different image. Let's go into our global edits and increase a bit of contrast between all the channels. That's pretty cool. All right, folks, let's go over some of the images that we edited here today. Thank you for being part of this today. If you're joining here live, and if you're restreaming this, hopefully you've been enjoying this time with us together, and we will be coming back doing these really cool editing zones that I really, really enjoy, just experimenting with photography and the different methods that we have available to us in order to experiment, in order to practice our craft and develop our skill sets. So see you here on the next round. I will attempt to make a really nice set of videos ahead of time for y'all so that you can save it and join me here live, and you can interact with us. With me, us, Lightroom, with me. And yeah, I'm excited to continue doing this. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you on the other side.